Hi, it's Genevieve Marshall, and welcome to this episode of the Adventurous Podcast. Today, I am so excited to dig in with Alicia Hanf. She's a TedX speaker, a former Army Special Operations turned VC, current global head of partnerships at LG, and the founder and managing director of Dear Mama VC. She has an incredibly impressive rap sheet, and it's just no surprise that she has been advising and working with startups for quite a while. She's got so much to share with us from her incredible journey. So happy to have you here, Alicia.
It's so wonderful to be here. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. We've got so much to share with you guys today, and I'm thrilled to dive right in. I cannot wait to talk with you guys about Alicia on her journey. She's just got this track record that is just incredible and impressive and very unique. And not only is Alicia a complete badass in the business world, but she's also full of wisdom, femininity, and light. And this girl is just the real freaking deal. But before we dive in, let's just talk a little bit about Brex. How appropriate, I would say, because we've got two VC gals and Brex is a venture bank. I can speak myself from experience. Being with the right bank as a startup is key. I personally was absolutely saved by my banker back in the day. I had a startup and things were not going well. I'm sure you all will hear that story one day. This banker, her name was Sherry. She was amazing. She's back in Oregon now. Brex didn't exist at the time, but I will never forget her. And she really helped me during a time when the last thing you wanted to do was be talking to a bank. So Brex wasn't a thing back then, but entrepreneurs can scale the business faster with Brex. Open an account online in only 10 minutes, deposit cash, send payments, track spend, and get a credit card with 10 to 20x higher limits. No personal guarantee, no fees, and rewards like 7x back on rideshare and 2x back on recurring software. Visit Adventurous Podcast for a special offer. So that being said, Alicia, we've got you here. I'd love for you to just, share a little bit about yourself, a little bit about your journey, and let's dive right into what it is that's made your journey what it is today.
Yeah. Oh, I love this question so much. And I think, listening to you talk and just having a moment of just like being here and being present because I see your sign in the background that says, "Welcome to the good life."
Yes.
And I feel like this is the good life, but
Hmm.
things haven't always been the good life for me, even though looking back at it now, I know everything was happening for me exactly how it was supposed to. But it's been quite a journey with a lot of twists and turns for me to get here. And so, as you mentioned, by the way, can you please always introduce me anywhere I go or like send me that because that was so just I'm so humble by the way you inspired me or the way you introduced me. But
I'll just
my
walk
journey,
around with like feathers and frozen grapes feeding
yeah,
you. And I'll be like, the queen is here.
with two
Yeah.
queens in the
Like,
room.
yeah.
Yeah, so my journey has had a lot of twists and turns. As you mentioned, I started off my career very different than a lot of people likely in VC. I was in the Army for 6 years, part of a specialized branch of the Chemical Corps known as Technical Escort, and I was the only woman on a 14-man team. So we didn't even say 14-person team, we said 14-man team. And so this was really interesting for me. It's really my first job, first career was being in this position. And my job on the team was operations, logistics, but I really became the glue of everybody. And I remember I'd always tell, my fellow teammates, they would pick people to go out on missions, and I'd say, well, do you want one of the guys to go with you? And they would always pick me every single time. They would always say, you're the only woman on our team. You have unique combat multipliers that none of us have. You have unique strengths as a woman. So we need you to go on every single
I
mission. And
love that.
so,
Combat
yeah,
multipliers. The first time you
combat
told me that, I was
multipliers.
like, ooh, what's a combat multiplier?
Yeah,
I
we
want
need to
one.
use that. No, you are a combat multiplier. And from our talks, I know you definitely
Mhm.
have them too. But that was really my first awareness that being a woman was my first unique superpower, just showing up as myself. And then from the military, I went to Afghanistan, and that's where I discovered my love for building ecosystems, which sounds bizarre to develop a love for ecosystems in a war zone. But I was, worked in intelligence, worked with a lot of local national linguists in Afghanistan, and realized that we were getting information based with fear-based tactics or based with, threats. And we were giving bad information and we were getting bad information. And so I said, why don't we use empathy to build trust and actually build a community with the people that we're working alongside
Mm.
with? And so
Mhm.
people thought I was crazy, but it ended up being really successful. And I built ecosystems and networks that were in place still till we pulled out about a year ago. And so from there, went on to Department of Defense, and realized that I needed to get out of the government space and I wanted to work with professional athletes. So I've always felt the need, probably similar to yourself, to pave the way for other fierce women where women aren't ordinarily represented. And so I thought I wanted to be a sports agent. And it was there working for an agency with the Baltimore Ravens where I hit a first major point on my journey. And I lost my mother very tragically to domestic violence. And so I'm a mother, I'm a single mother, and my youngest daughter was about one at the time. And I learned that my mother had been shot and killed at trying to leave an abusive partner. And when this happened, I left my whole life behind. I moved back to LA. And I told my little brothers when I got home, I said, this changes us for the rest of our lives, but we get to choose if this
Mhm.
changes us for better or worse. And so we made a pact to
Mhm.
change the world a little to a lot each day. And so, being, I feel like, a glutton for punishment, I launched a tech
I have
company.
chills right now. I'm not kidding. Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah.
Anyway.
And so I launched a tech company. So I'm a recovering ed tech founder, and I realized that as a woman of color, a woman in tech, a military veteran, a single mother, I had every obstacle to overcome instead of every opportunity to be successful. And I remember at one point feeling so lost, and I literally like put my head in my hands and I just said, how the heck did I get here? And I heard of my drill sergeant's voice from basic training. He said, do you know what it means to find your last known point? And the last known point is a principle that I've used to navigate my entire life, but essentially it's military terminology. So when you get lost, and we will, don't panic, don't look around, just go back to your last known point and replot your course and try again. And so I realized for me, my last known point was the military and
Mhm.
that sense of community. And so that's what I've just been determined to build every single step of the way in my career.
That's amazing. I got chills like at least twice. So,
Mm.
I was watching your TED Talk, a while back, and you said something about that point in time when you lost your mother. And you said, I did never get a chance to prove to her that I was good enough. And that got me really thinking. I was thinking a lot. Well, I think I was cooking or something like that. And you're talking about your significance in the army and how you had felt that place of belonging and, that last known point and that like that what you did mattered. And there's a loss of identity that you experience after the military. And I think a lot of people experience out of the military, but a lot of entrepreneurs feel that as well. And, chasing this belonging and translating, what could be darkness into the light. And I think so many entrepreneurs now feel so lonely and lost and they feel like they spiral. And I know I've had this experience in a startup and, I'm curious, you know, what needing to prove to someone that you're good enough is like a darkness, but you've translated that
Yeah.
into good, into light, And, what would you say to someone who was coming up to you and sharing with you being in that experience today?
Yeah, that's an interesting question, and I feel like nobody ever brings that up. I'm actually caught off guard right now about that needing to prove myself to my mother because I
Mhm.
actually I didn't realize this, but one of the things that I tell myself every day, I write in my journal first thing in the morning, and I say,
Mm.
I am enough and I'll always have more than I need. And I've had to teach myself that I am enough because I feel like, especially for women, especially for women raising capital, so oftentimes we get compared to other people. Well, so and so is
Yeah.
doing this. Well, if only you were married, or if you had accomplished this, or if you've only done that. And so we get a lot of like not enoughness that's put on us as women. And so
Mhm.
oftentimes we just need to sit back. And you talked about like in our femininity earlier, but just like sit back and just realize like I just need to show up as my true authentic self, that I am enough. And
Mhm.
I've chased this wanting to prove myself to my mom a lot over my entire life and never feeling like I was good enough. And I don't necessarily know what that comes from, but if somebody were to come to me and say, I'm starting this journey, what is your advice for me? I would say, for one, you are enough. For two, you're exactly who and where you're supposed to be. And I would
Mhm.
really challenge them to do the last known point exercise, but really, which is anchored around finding your values and your why. When I didn't mention this in my introduction, but what prompted me to launch my fund, Dear Mama Ventures, last year I went to my mother's grave for the first time since losing her about 6 years ago. And I just never had the courage to go to her grave before. And I went for the first time last year and I wrote a letter and I said, Dear Mama, I wholeheartedly believe it's my mission and my purpose in life to create an ecosystem where all people can show up vulnerable enough to dream and have the resources to do it. And ever since I've been anchored in my purpose and my why, it's been hard for me to actually feel not enough because I know at the end of the day,
Mhm.
no matter what comes over me, that I have a specific purpose. And as long as that's my North Star, then I am enough and I have what it takes and I'm always exactly where I need to be.
I think that you hit on a piece of gold right there and you kind of just like went right through it, which is as long as I'm anchored into my purpose and my why, I will always feel like enough.
Yeah.
And, I know for me, I share, with my readers as well as, here on the podcast about, I've got that sense of darkness too. For me, it's not necessarily my mother, but it's my grandfather and my dad, and to just constantly chasing this approval from somebody who's dead. you know
Yeah.
I'm the daughter of a fighter pilot, and it was, I was never like in the military myself, but I was raised around that, and there was very high standards, and kind of, I don't think that my family meant to convey to me that I wasn't enough, but I received that message very young that I needed to be more.
Yeah.
Therefore, I am not enough. And so, when I found my ground and my center and that space within myself that I could go to, where which is what you found when you visited your mother's grave, um, there was a sense of grounded confidence that I found there, that I was able to actually say, I don't really care what you think of me. And I don't care what they
Yeah.
think of me. Or,
That's
it was,
powerful.
yeah. And so, I talked to a lot of people who are like out there chasing alignment. They're like,
Mm.
that's the holy grail. And how do you get it? And you just basically told the secret to where you find it, right? Which is,
Yes.
it's being just very grounded to your purpose and connecting to it each and every morning. Um, one of the themes, that I wanted to go into a little bit with you here that you've talked about is about grief. And I think it's interesting because, you've obviously been through a lot of that. And I think all of us who have had significant losses in our life, whether those losses are a loved one or even whether those losses are sometimes the loss of a business or something that's a piece of ourself, grief never goes away. It just changes and it morphs, and we just learn to live with it. And I recently had my birthday, and I was reflecting on my life, and the past decade of, my entire 30s that I've been through. And I was like, gosh, I've been through so much grief. Grief is a trend, it's a theme, but it's also been one of the greatest teachers for me.
Yes.
I'm curious what you feel, as you went through that and continue to cope with that. What do you think about the role that grief might be playing in terms of loss and recovery and coming back and staying grounded to that purpose of yourself?
Yes, I love this so much. Grief is a great teacher. Grief is also a gift. I remember when I lost my
Mm-hmm.
mother, one of her friends, she came up to me and she wrote me a card. And in the card, she just said, life is really rewarding. It can be really unfortunate and really mean at times, but if you allow it to, it'll be the greatest gift. And I looked at that and I had to read it over and over again because I'm like, life is really rewarding and life can be really unfortunate and can be really mean at times. I
Mm-hmm.
remember when I lost my mom, I was like, the first thing I said was, why is this happening to me? Not why is this happening for me? And looking back at it now, it was one of the most pivotal moments in my life. The way I love my daughters, the way I see life
Mm-hmm.
now, although I would do anything for my mom to be here, it was one of the greatest gifts because I wasn't living my life. I was operating in fear. I was running away from home really for years of my life. And it wasn't until losing my mother that without even hesitating, I came back home and I found myself. And who I am as a mother, a friend, a leader has changed exponentially, in the better because of that experience. I also think that grieving and really mental health in general, um, I always describe it as like cleaning your house while you're having a house party. It's just kind of like you think you pick up one section and then of cups and you turn around and somebody spilled something over there. So we're kind of always working on it, always
Yeah.
finding something else. But if we can just allow, ourselves to be present, to feel, to see the good when things are bad, we can really enjoy it at the same time.
Yeah. I think one of the things too is allowing it,
Yeah.
in business, especially, we're out there and, people put these facades on themselves where they have like this business persona, and that business persona is oftentimes lifeless.
Hmm.
And I was actually, as you were talking about, you said something that reminded me of a quote that I love from Sadhguru. It says, if you look at life on the surface, it is brutal. If you look at it with some sensitivity, it is beautiful. But if you look at it with great depth, everything here is magical.
Oh my
And,
gosh.
I was thinking about how the business world can seem so dry and like bleh, In fact, I never even wanted to be in business growing up because I just saw it as people wearing pantyhose and sitting in cubicles, and I was like, that is not what I want to do. Like, you know. But I've discovered, like, well, welcome to the good life. Like, you can live it every day. This is my mantra. It's my reminder. And you can sit and have conversations with a banker. Maybe it's Brex, but about, and you can share a piece of yourself or a piece of the world that is real, and you will feel the entire room change, and you will feel the entire interaction shift, because all of a sudden it's like it it becomes like, oh, this isn't business, this is like the real deal, and people will come out, I guess they'll emerge, and
Yeah.
it's amazing to see, and it can happen each and every single day, that's one of the things I think it's amazing, but it's like you kind of have to go through it first.
Hmm.
You know what I mean?
Absolutely. And that what you said, allowing, that's just such a powerful word in general. And even
Hmm.
I feel like oftentimes we have to give ourselves permission to be, or just to allow. And Brene
Hmm.
Brown talks about this all the time. And it's a practice she's implemented in her own business, but just giving the permission to be vulnerable, giving the permission to show up as yourselves. I often joke with, some of my closest friends and teammates, but I was like, I need a podcast of just the real Slim Shady, like the real me, because
Yeah.
oftentimes people see me and they think I'm so serious, which I am a serious person, but there's this just very, funny, comedic side of me, very playful side of me. And I feel like few people get to see that. And I often have to remind myself to give myself permission to just show up and be my true authentic self.
Yeah. I think it's uncomfortable at first. It's almost kind of like, okay, I'm gonna like take my clothes off and walk outside
Yeah, it's
naked.
vulnerable.
What are people gonna think of me? And you will have people come to you, like I do all the time, especially with the stuff I sometimes write and sometimes post. I'll have, well-meaning people in my life come to me and be like, "You share too much. Like, only put the good stuff out there." And I'm
Right.
like, "No,
No.
it's not." I mean, of course I'm discerning, but I'm like, if we can't be real, then what are we?
Yeah.
I might as well put
Yeah.
pantyhose on and sit in a cubicle
That's
somewhere.
right.
I refuse to do
Just
that.
don't wear pantyhose ever.
Yeah. So, I'm curious, this was such a pivotal period of your life, that the story you tell, and, you guys can all go to the show notes and see Alicia's TED Talk, and you can look at some other information from this story. It's just very inspiring. But and I'd love to hear from you. Obviously, you learned a lot about yourself from this period of your life. What do you think you learned about others, about humans?
Yeah, that's
Because we're all
such a
just
fun
humans
question.
doing business, but like
That's
whatever,
right.
we're human beings. So I'm
Yeah.
curious, what did you learn about humans?
I think that's the biggest lesson, is that we are all humans,
Hmm.
I think one of the biggest lessons of the last year has been just really seeing people live the human experience. And so I
Hmm.
mentioned early on, um, creating networks that still existed in Afghanistan until we pulled out about a year ago. And when we pulled out of Afghanistan, I had about 2,000 people contact me from Afghanistan asking for help that were, contacted me from some sort of knowing me. They found me, and I was involved with a few different groups that got people out. And what
Mm.
I saw in that moment was people being um, disappointed with the way, I'm like, how do I say this nicely? Disappointed with the way that the government was handling the evacuation from Afghanistan, but
Yeah.
saying, I'm not going to complain about it. I'm going to use my time, money, energy, resources to figure out a way to help these humans. It wasn't help these Afghani people. It wasn't help these,
Mhm.
former soldiers. It was like, I'm a person, they're a person. I need to help them. And I feel like I really got to experience humanity's finest through that moment of just people caring about other people. I think one of the other biggest lessons is learning that I am love, and in surrounding myself with people who are full of love and light, and just if constantly being around those people. And my daughter taught me this lesson. She taught me how to love,
Mhm.
but that people communicate wants and needs and love in different ways. And that's not something that I took into my business self before. I felt like I was operating very much from like a traditional business sense, but really taking love and empathy
Mhm.
and kindness into the way that I operate in business has really just transformed everything in my life.
Yeah, I think it transforms business relationships too because
Mhm.
I don't see things as having to be a certain way. Like, let's say negotiating a deal, we're both VCs, right? Sometimes people do things that's you look at this and you're like, what? And everyone else in the room immediately goes to this conclusion.
Yep.
This person's this
Yep.
person's that. And I never do. I immediately kind of try to think, why are they doing this? This is very
Mhm.
out of character. And they're not stupid, and they're not this, they're not that. Usually there's a reason, and the reason's not always a good one. But if you can understand why they might be acting this way or why they might be doing something, and a lot of times that comes from having to have that empathy of saying, like, we've all
Yeah.
been through things, and this person's been through something too, and something that happened that either I did or is going on has triggered them and they're defensive or whatever that might be. But when you can come at it from this place, all of a sudden you become just non reactive because you're like, there's no need to react. I just need to understand,
Yes,
you know? It,
absolutely.
it doesn't mean they're going to get what they want.
Right.
Just because I seek to understand doesn't mean I'm going to
Yes.
give you, I'm going to bend over. I'm not a doormat.
Right.
But I think that learning to be love is learning to be acceptance,
Mhm.
which says, I accept you in your tantrum. And I would seek to understand why you're tantruming, but it doesn't mean I'm going to give you what you want. Yeah, exactly. So um, so here you are today. You're the managing partner of Dear Mama VC, and you're queen bee of the hive over there at LG. And a lot of people see a lot of people see venture capital as like this holy grail. And I'm curious, how do you think that your experiences, in the military and with your mother and everything, um, uniquely prepared you specifically, for such a time as this, to be the executive you are, to be the leader you are, and to be a great investor?
Oh my goodness. I love that so much. I think for me, so something I've realized, and I'm always surprised by it, but leadership, I think people are born leaders. A lot of us are born leaders. And I think
Hmm.
a step from there are people who are wired to serve. And what I think the military taught me was that I'm wired to both serve and lead. And a lot of people don't
Hmm.
come from a place of servant leadership. And I think,
Mm-mm.
especially in venture capital, oftentimes people think, how
Yeah,
can we make as much money? It's like very
that's an
extractive.
understatement.
Right. It's very
Hmm.
extractive. So I think for one of our calls to action of the fund is it's time to reimagine everything. We're in such a period of time where we really just need to think differently and do differently because the systems and everything that's been in place are no longer serving a majority of the world. So like one, how do we do
Yeah.
things differently? Being in the military has, I feel like, given me such an edge. And this being, growing up in a military family, but no other organization is investing millions and millions of dollars of training leaders. My
Hmm.
tolerance for stress, so my tolerance for chaos, coming from a war zone and other things, like I know what it's like to be in a truly high stressful environment. but I also know, have the ability to pivot and to make decisions that are big decisions, which can seem like very fast, but in slowing down time to be able to come up with those decisions. So one of the things we say in the military is slow is smooth and smooth is fast. And
Mm-hmm.
oftentimes I think just my ability to slow down, take a breath, like observe the situation and then make a call with confidence, whether it's right or wrong, has really served me really well in this space. And then
Mm-hmm.
just knowing at the end of the day that there are humans on the other side of every interaction, and so building relationships and the my ability to have to build relationships and to build trust insanely fast in Afghanistan because my life and others' lives were at risk now has translated into the super ability to build trustful relationships with people that are helpful not only to me in business but to the communities I serve, portfolio companies, and just the way that I'm assessing business deals and opportunities.
I think about so that slow is smooth and smooth is fast, and the
Yes.
ability to detach your emotions from an immediate reaction, even
Mhm.
if you've got shells flying around,
Yeah.
and to say what's going on at a 30,000 foot level. I think a lot about um, that kind of that kind of headspace required an investment and in
Mhm.
investing and being able to just keep a very cool head and being able to think about things from all sides and being able to kind of look at it from a bigger picture view, not let other people's crazy spinning up, you know, get to you, and what it takes to be a great investor is in a way, what it takes to be great um, in the military.
Yeah.
Would you agree?
I do, and I love
Hmm.
to hear you say that, and I need to talk about that more often. I know when I was at a pitch competition with my tech startup several years ago, I was in the middle of the competition and the gentleman stopped me and he was like, "Hold on a second, I need to stop you." He was like, "Stop the
Hmm.
clock." And here I was like, "Great, I suck, like no one's going to invest in me." And he was like, "Aren't you a veteran?" And I said, "Yes." And he's like, "Why is that nowhere in your pitch deck? You need to talk about being a veteran. This is such a competitive advantage. It was a combat
Hmm.
multiplier in business that I was a veteran. But up until that point in my life, I wasn't identifying as a veteran. And I think one of the biggest pieces of my life work has been rewriting the narrative of what it means to be a veteran. So oftentimes when people think veteran, they often think of, the Rambo type or potentially somebody with PTSD or like a GI Jane. And more often than not, people look at me and they say, "You don't look like you were in the army." Well, what does that
Yeah.
mean? Because like, what does that mean?
You don't look
Um,
like a VC
right, you don't look
either.
like a VC. Yeah, what does that
Yeah.
mean? And
Hmm.
so I think our work is rewriting the narrative. So when people see someone like us walk into the room, they think, of course, this woman is a badass VC, she's crushing it. Or when they think of a veteran, they think of somebody who is highly qualified to take on any mission, who is going to be an incredible empathetic leader, who is wired to serve and lead, who is great under high stress environments, and who has a way of assessing situations in a way that are beneficial for every person involved.
That's fabulous. I think I've met so many investors who don't have any emotional intelligence. and I truly do think that it's so much a competitive advantage. And I know you've experienced this at Dear Mama. I've seen the same thing, on my end and at Suncoast is when you can connect for real with
Yeah.
people and do business from this space, you get immediate translation into preferential terms,
Yep.
access into deals that no one else gets. You get a lot of these things. And I don't know if you have this experience, but I often get it where people like investors and people will come to me and be like, "How did you do this?"
Yep.
And they want to know the steps like, "Oh, first you X and then you Y." And
Yep.
it's like there is no step. It's more just like your manner with people and
Yeah. You're like, "I am the secret
it's
sauce."
yeah, yeah. It's like they're going to give it to me, but they're not going to give it to you. So you can't steal my competitive advantage unless
Yeah.
you go through what I've been through. And it's the
Yeah.
same thing with you.
Yeah.
It's like they can't steal your competitive advantage or rip it off because it's it comes from being forged the way that you
Mhm.
were
Mhm.
and that
Absolutely. I
ability to
love that.
connect with people.
Forged. I love that.
Forged,
Good
yes,
word.
forged in fire. I think that's
Fortune
one
Fire.
of the
It's such
things
a
I
good
talk about the
show.
phoenix. I've got my phoenix necklace, which is like,
Yeah.
my thing.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, so I guess, do you have any final words of wisdom that you would like to share? Imagine that you're sitting in front of an entrepreneur, or maybe a not entrepreneur, but an entrepreneur, a business person, and they're in the depths of the darkness. And
Mhm.
I've been there, you've been there.
Yeah.
What would you say to them, knowing what you know now?
Yeah. I would say a few things. For one, and this sounds like very woo woo, but it's something that's changed
Hmm.
my life. And we talked about this. I rewired my brain through gratitude. In my most depressed moments, at my lowest of
Mm.
low, I couldn't meditate because there was so much on my mind, couldn't sleep, hated waking up. I would wake up in the morning and like, oh, I'm awake. Great. And I was able to simply see the sun coming through my window and say, that's beautiful, and feel gratitude in my heart for that. And so I think just like stop, drop, and find that one thing or a few things or a few people that you can be grateful for, and keep growing on that, because there is so much. And sometimes when we're in the trenches, we're so heads down, it's hard for us to see that there is light at the end of the tunnel. But if you just keep
Mhm.
going, just like my mom's friend said, the journey can be unfortunate and really mean, but I promise it's worth it. um, the second thing I would say, especially to women, is lean in when we're feeling uncomfortable. And so
Mm.
this has been a great lesson learned for me of feeling insecure with women in my life. So I even remember the first time I heard you speak on the VC,
VC Lab.
why do I
Yeah.
wanna call it a podcast? It's not a podcast, the Zoom, because it should have been
Yeah.
in real life.
Mhm.
But I heard you speak, and I reached out to you immediately because your words stuck with me, and I had the split second, like, less than a split second, where I could have been intimidated by you because of your experience and all that you accomplished, or I could lean in and say, "We're on this journey together, like, how do we go do this, and really be impactful, and link arms, and be friends, and be partners on
Mhm.
this journey." And so I think oftentimes we face those moments as women where we can choose to be insecure and threatened, or we can lean in and say, let's do this together. And so my advice is just lean in, just like Sheryl
Yeah.
Sandberg would say.
I would absolutely second that, because I know there's been plenty of times I've walked into a room and I have said, I do not belong here, because
Yeah.
I looked around the room and I didn't see anyone like me and I just didn't feel like I belonged. And I had to do self talk. You belong here. You
Yes.
belong here. And then what I discovered is a lot, most of these rooms were men and, like twice my age and very intimidating. And what I did learn is most of those men really wanted to accept me, and
Yeah.
they open arms and they would open doors and they would help, and they really wanted to. But I had to make that first step. I had to walk into that room and walk up and introduce myself and say, I belong here. And, have there been people who didn't accept me? Yeah, for sure. And did the things that I fear happen sometimes? Yes. But like a majority of the time, no.
Yeah.
I was accepted and they wanted to accept me. And it just so happens that, maybe we don't feel like we belong, but I think we can rewire our brains to convince
Yes.
ourselves that we do. You talked a little bit about your practices and your rituals, one, waking up each morning, and having a moment of gratitude. Um, what other practices and rituals do you have on a regular basis that really fuel you, keep you focused and aligned to that true mission and North Star that you have that takes you forward?
Yeah, that's a fun question. So there's an author, and I cannot remember her name, but she wrote the book The Artist's Way. And
Oh, I love that book.
yeah. And so
I can't remember her name either.
I went on a sabbatical like 2 years
Hmm.
ago during COVID, a sabbatical, and I wanted to write a book, and just like
Hmm.
a book on navigating trauma. And,
Hmm.
I was like, I've never written a book before, but I love to write. And so one of my friends gave me that book, and there's a practice called morning pages where you get up every day and you just write a few pages. And
Hmm.
that has been something that has really anchored me. Sometimes I just need that jolt of creativity. I find myself oftentimes writing love letters to the sun, really, because I get up, I watch a sunrise, and I write in my journal, and it's just things in my heart that only I see, but that are important for me to
Yeah.
share, and things that I write down that are important for me. Where do I see myself in the next few years? I know for certain in my heart that I have this home in Positano because I've seen it so many times, and I often journal of this experience of being in Positano. But that's
Hmm.
something that has really helped me just feel human, and it's something that no matter where I am in the world, I always have my journal. I can pull it out anytime and just simply write to myself, and it connects me immediately to who I am.
Here's mine.
Yay! I love that.
Yes. Hmm.
I love that.
Yeah, absolutely. I would agree. I think it's so easy, especially, we're exhausted and we're
Yeah,
running around. We have a million things going on and, gotta do, gotta do, gotta accomplish. But just to take even 5 minutes, you take 5 minutes to scroll through your phone and don't even notice it. So, take
exactly.
5 minutes to write down a couple pages, even if you're writing about the sun
Yeah,
or, whatever. I do the same. I try to, some mornings, I will admit, I get in my journal and it ends up being a to-do list for the day because that's what's coming out. And I'm like, okay, it's
right.
fine, but I try to make sure I take a little bit of time every single day just for me and just to connect to that space and observe it. So I'd love to connect you. Where can people connect with you?
Yes, so you can find me on LinkedIn. I don't know if you're gonna have this in the notes, but Alicia Hanf on
Hmm.
LinkedIn. You can go to my Instagram, it's Alicia the Key. We also have Dear Mama VC on Instagram, and you can Google Dear Mama VC is our website.com.
.com. All right, folks.